Hey, so one of my favorite movie genres are horror movies that are all set in one location. It can make for some really intense moments. I've just always loved it. I've been a big fan of these movies where characters are usually just like stuck in one place or even one room, and it all takes place usually over like one night. I love that sort of stuff. So I just kind of wanted to make a list and talk a bit about it. Now, do keep in mind that this isn't going to be a definitive list of all the definitively, objectively best ones. These are just some notable ones that I liked, my favorite ones, the ones I want to talk about. I'm making this list for me, not for you. I'm making it for you too, but I'm making it for me as well, okay? These are the ones I like. So yeah, it's about as simple as that. Let's just get to it. So the first one I wanted to talk about is this one called P2, which is technically a Christmas horror movie that's all set in this one like car park or parking lot or parking garage or whatever it is that the Americans would call it. It's like one of those multi-level car parks where this woman is stuck in her workplace after hours, after like an office Christmas party type of thing. She gets stuck under the car park and is terrorized by this just crazy killer guy who has this certain affinity for her. He likes her in a certain way, and that kind of adds layers to this film as well, because he's not just trying to kill her, he's trying to, like, I don't know, date her or something like that. It's kind of fucked up in that way. But this is also just a very bloody movie as well, might I add, as he kind of goes out of his way to do anything that he can to get to the protagonist. And as well as this being a film that has some pretty great set pieces in here as well, surprisingly so. And it's just a pretty damn impressive film for a low budget horror film, if you ask me. I've been a fan of this one for years. I really enjoy it. And yeah, it's actually a pretty big recommend from me, to be honest. Then next up is a movie called ATM, which is all set inside an ATM building. I don't know. It's like this little building that is dedicated to like 2 or 3 ATM machines, or ATMs. You don't need to say machine because automatic teller machine. You know, it's dumb. Anyway, don't worry about it. That's not the point. The point is, this is another, like P2, another Christmas horror movie, I suppose, because it's set in winter and stuff. Even though when I say winter, I'm not like Christmas, because in Australia it's summer and Christmas. It doesn't matter. That's not the point either. Basically, this is about these 3 groups of friends who are just trying to make it home, I think, after like an office Christmas party. Again, much like P2. But they have to stop in an ATM for some reason, I think to pay for the taxi or something like that. Anyway, they find themselves, though, trapped in this ATM building by this killer who is just waiting outside with this hood over his face, obscuring his face. And from here, you know, that's where the games begin. And we see that this villain is just this ultimate badass who's way too perfect, can do anything, and can trap these characters absolutely, you know, perfectly. There's nothing that they can do to get out. And it's kind of fun to just watch them try their little antics and their little set pieces and stuff, trying to make it out alive, basically. So, like, there's a scene where they're, like, trying to set a little fire in like a bin so that the fire alarms will go off, so that the authorities make it over there, I suppose, and all that kind of stuff. And then yeah, obviously nothing works, and it's just kind of like this cat and mouse between them as the killer gets closer and closer to killing them all. It's just fun. This is another one that's not hugely respected. It's got pretty low ratings and all that kind of stuff, but hey, I don't know, take it with a grain of salt, but I like it a lot. Hey, watch it, maybe. Then next up is a movie that's very similar, actually, called Splinter. This is all set in a petrol station, and with this one, the villain is like just this entity. It's like this alien-like figure, I suppose, that kind of reminds me of Venom, because it's like this piece of goo with spikes in it. And when it like catches up with its victims or whatever, it starts to kind of ignite spikes through them and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I don't know, it's just kind of like this horrific little B horror movie that's a bit silly, if I'm being honest, and it doesn't quite have the budget that it probably should for what it's trying to go for, but there's something just really charming about it. And, you know, it's kind of badass in its own little small way, you know what I mean? Then next up is a movie called Feedback. This is all set in like a recording studio as a radio host is taken hostage. And from there on, things get a little intense. It's more of a thriller than a horror. It doesn't get that bloody, but it definitely does get intense. I did only watch Feedback quite recently, but it actually blew me away. I really, really enjoyed it. So it's actually a pretty high recommend. Then next up is a movie called Frozen. This ain't Disney's Frozen, by the way. Elsa is not to be seen. This is a movie from 2010 about a group of friends who get stuck in like a chairlift overnight, like at a ski resort place. They're going on like the chairlift thing, and it just stops. The power stops, and they are stuck there overnight with the danger of freezing to death and possibly other things. I actually don't remember what else happens in this movie, but I remember liking it quite a lot, and I just wanted to mention it here. Then next up is a movie called You're Next, and if you're a big horror fan and for some reason haven't seen this, fucking get on it. You're Next is honestly such a great film. It's kind of like half a mumblecore film, as there's like a lot of dialogue dialogue in there and a lot of characterization as we see this family attending a dinner party where masked killers soon come and try to get into that house after they've killed some previous victims where they wrote on the window saying, "You're next," which actually doesn't play that big a part into the plot. But the rest of the plot is just about this family trying to survive from these killers who are all wearing like farm animal masks. And it's just really awesome. There's some surprises in here. One of the characters is a bit more of a badass than you might realize at first. And with all that being said, if you are a big horror fan and know the tropes and cliches and stuff and can have a sense of humor about that kind of thing, this is definitely a film to appreciate as well. Honestly, I think this is a modern horror masterpiece. I fucking love You're Next. And if you're a big horror fan, you are bound to as well. Then next up is Inside, which is a movie that I only watched for the first time. It is part of the French extremity movement that happened throughout the 2000s with films like Martyrs and High Tension. This one is one that I hadn't seen before, as I just said. And this is about a pregnant woman who is being terrorized by somebody who is absolutely fascinated with her baby. Like, she's heavily pregnant, got a big belly and whatever, and this killer is trying to get in, literally inside her, which is definitely very concerning. That being said, this is a super bloody film. My God, if you can't handle the gore, stay far, far, far away from this one. It is pretty damn hardcore when it comes to that stuff. There's blood falling off the walls and everything, dripping off the walls is probably the more correct term. And yeah, it's fucking horrific stuff. I will say that I don't love some of the decisions that it later makes throughout the film. There's some stuff at the end where I'm like, kind of made me question what the point of everything was. But prior to that, the rest of it is a pretty fun slasher film, though on the very extreme side. Like, it's not just a slasher film in the way that Scream is, where somebody might get stabbed in the back and they fall to the floor with a bit of blood that come out of their mouth or something. It's a lot more graphic than that. Yeah, I didn't love this as much as I was expecting to be honest, because like I've been meaning to watch this film for quite a long time, to be honest, and I thought I'd be pretty into it. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd, so you know, I liked it, but I didn't love it. But you might, so I thought it was worth mentioning. Then next up is a movie called Hush. This is a movie directed by Mike Flanagan, who made The Haunting of Hill House, Midnight Mass, a few other things like that. So you already know just by that it's going to be good. This is a movie about a deaf woman who is being terrorized by another masked killer outside of the house trying to get in. I know that's starting to get a bit repetitive, right? These home invasion things. Like, that's why a lot of people don't love that genre, just because they all run out like to be pretty similar in the end. But Hush, if you ask me, does set itself apart by having this main character be deaf, as we see the extra challenges that she has to face, but as well as the ways that she kind of turns things to her advantage as well. Like, that's something that I really like about Hush. She's a really smart protagonist. You're not sitting there watching the generic dumb horror character being like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing that? No, go the other way," and all that kind of stuff. No, you're like, "Damn, that was actually pretty smart. I might not have thought about that." You're not yelling at the protagonist in this movie. You're rooting for her, you know? You're like, "Damn, this is a good character who deserves to live through this situation. I hope she does." Like, that's something that I really like about this. I think Hush is actually a really cleverly made film, and I think it's pretty damn great. Then next up is, and you've already heard of this one, but it's another home invasion one, the one to beat them all really, The Strangers, okay? I think that this is probably the best of the home invasion films, if just for the fact that it is the most bleak, the most brutal, the most grounded. It just feels like it could actually happen. And when the characters, the villains, later on explain their reasonings for being there in the first place, just being that, you were home, so we just came to you. That's why we targeted you, because you were home. That's just something that is so terrifying, especially if you're watching this home alone at night and stuff, and you're like, "Oh my God, the strangers could come to me now." Like, it just feels more realistic than a lot of other movies within this subgenre. And I think it is just really, really intense for those sorts of reasons, as well as giving us characters that we're rooting for. We just feel bad for them. It's a very bleak film. There's not a lot of fun here, but I think it's done really, really well. Now, The Strangers is not a hugely respected film. People don't love this one, okay? It doesn't have like the highest ratings and whatever. Critics didn't love it and whatever and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know, take it from me, man. If you like my opinions, The Strangers is great. But if you do like my opinions, you've probably already seen it, so I don't know. And I also just want to mention the sequel, The Strangers Prey at Night, which is super underrated. I will die on the hill of that, deserving more respect, especially that pool scene. If you've seen it, the pool scene in The Strangers Prey at Night is amazing. I fucking love both the Strangers movies, and I think they're underrated as hell. Then next up is kind of an inverse of the home home invasion subgenre where the prey actually enters the predator's house in this case, in a movie called The Perfect Host. This is about a guy who's like a robber, he's down on his luck, he's trying to just make it, basically he's on the run from the cops and he's trying to take advantage of people left, right and center. Basically he sees this house, he knocks on the door, he pretends he knows somebody, like a mutual friend or something, and he asks if he can use the phone. The guy lets him in, but he knows straight away that this dude's dodgy, he doesn't trust him for a second, and so the host of this house then goes on to do whatever the hell he wants to this main character, as we soon realize that this guy's a straight up psychopath. One of the funnest psychopaths of recent modern cinema, if you ask me, just by the way. This is a great villain. This guy has like a bad case of like schizophrenia or whatever, where he's seeing people all around him that aren't actually there and everything. And like, look, that sounds like it could get exploitive and offensive, and I agree with other titles that it definitely could head in that way, but I feel like this one's just so cartoony and silly and strange and just a fun horror movie that you can't really take it too seriously as you watch him literally dance around thinking he's having a rager in his house, like this big party, as he's trying to make this main character also partake in this party and dance around and stuff before he does whatever the hell he's planning to do to him. And you see from both their perspectives, the killer's perspective where there's all these people partying, and from the main guy's perspective where you just see this one guy fucking dancing in the room by himself, and it's like, what the hell is going on? What am I watching? It's just a whole lot of fun. I really like The Perfect Host. Then next up is a movie called Vacancy, which is all set in a motel room where the victims of this motel room, played by Luke Wilson and somebody else, I don't remember who, but Kate Beckinsale? I might be making that up. Anyway, the victims find themselves being recorded by cameras around the room, and they're like, what the hell's going on? They soon find that this certain motel is infamous, or not really infamous because nobody really knows about it, but they regularly shoot snuff films there, like real life snuff films, not real life in real life, but real life in the film, snuff films where they kill people on camera, obviously without the victim's consent. That's usually the case, right? I don't know why I felt like I had to point that out and sell like the tapes off to whoever the hell is buying that stuff. Oh, God. Anyway, they shoot snuff films at this motel room, and yeah, the main characters are set to be the next targets. The rest of the film is taking place over this one night as they try and get away from that. And yeah, it starts to get a little bit more of the thriller side than the horror side, and I really enjoy this film. I've actually watched it multiple times, and I think you should check it out if you haven't seen it. This one feels a lot like The Strangers, actually. It's kind of like The Strangers light. I would say it's not as good, but it's like almost the same movie, if I'm being honest. Then next up is a movie called The Collector, which I'm sure you've probably also seen if you're a fan of my channel, but let's talk about it anyway. I did review it a few years ago, but I've been a fan of it for many years. I've been a fan of this since it pretty much came out like a decade or so ago. Now, if you haven't heard of it, this is basically the Home Alone horror movie, where it is about this killer, literally the Collector, who sets up traps around this house in order to try to collect his victims. Now, what sets this apart, if you ask me, is the main character, not the Collector, like the main survivor guy. I don't remember his name, but there's something about this character that I do remember just really respecting. There was something that I really liked about him because he's established as this criminal, but he has a heart of gold, you know? I know that's kind of a cliche and everything, but there's something about this character that they really make work, and there's some great writing behind this character, which is something you might not expect going into a film like this, but it's true. He's this guy who, yes, is trying to do the wrong thing, but he's trying to do them for the right reasons and stuff. And then, you know, you kind of have to ask yourself, does he deserve to be here? Of course not, but it's kind of just like this interesting dilemma there where it's like, you know, I don't know how I feel about this guy, but I like him. And is that wrong? And there's just a little bit, there's a bit of layers there that's like a bit more interesting than just your generic horror shit that like might not go for that sort of thing. That's something that I really like about this film, as well as the titular villain, the Collector himself, who also has these layers of humanity in him as well. As we see glimpses of that when we see that he like cares about wildlife and that kind of stuff. Like there are some inconsistencies there that make him a bit more interesting than just being a faceless killer, even though he is that for the most part, if that makes any sense. But yeah, this is also a very bloody film, so if you are not into that kind of thing, I would say avoid it. Then next up is Green Room, and this is all taking place in like this neo-Nazi music venue where this punk band, who are not neo-Nazis, just might I add, witness something that they shouldn't have and are then held against their will and threatened very heavily, and those threats come to fruition eventually. Basically, this is just a really bloody, intense film that's more on the action thriller side than the horror side, and also this is Anton Yelchin's one of his last films and that actually makes this film a little bit hard to watch because, you know, as everyone knows, he passed away, and it's like, God, I don't want to watch him in pain. That's just like, it's kind of disturbing in that way that like obviously wasn't intentional. But anyway, I do though think that Green Room is honestly another one of these modern horror masterpieces. I think it's fantastic. Huge recommend. Then similar to that, this is kind of the trend here of the inverse home invasion stuff. There is Don't Breathe, which I'm sure you have heard of, but this is about a group of robbers who were trying to break into a blind man's house to literally just rob him blind. And at first you feel bad for him before you soon learn that no, you shouldn't really feel too bad for this guy. He ain't exactly a victim in this case. And yeah, I absolutely love kind of like the moral dilemma there where it's like, well, they shouldn't have been there in the first place, right? They're doing the bad thing. They aren't exactly good people in a way. But, you know, it's pretty clear who the real villain is, especially when a turkey baster gets taken out and it's like, Jesus Christ. Yeah, basically the blind man in this film is definitely the objective villain, but I do like that there is just a little bit of a moral dilemma there and everything. Makes it a little bit more interesting. And by the way, this film, might I add, is brutal. As we watch the victims, the robbers, whatever the hell you want to call them, just get beaten to a pulp and keep trying to get back up and make it out alive before getting beaten to a pulp once more. Anyway, yeah, Don't Breathe is great. Also, I think the sequel is actually surprisingly good. A lot of people hate it because they turn the villain into kind of a hero, which I understand why you'd view it that way, but if you actually watch it, I don't think it is saying this guy's okay. It's just saying he's doing a good thing. He happens to be doing something that we also want to happen right now in helping a certain character. But after that, don't worry about him. He's still the villain. That's how I view the sequel. Not a lot of people do though. Then next up is Mother with Jennifer Lawrence. You already know what Mother is, right? This is kind of like an artsy-fartsy horror movie set around this one house as things begin to happen and escalate. You don't quite know what is real and what's not. And when I saw this in cinemas, I gotta say, this was one of my most intense cinema experiences where I just felt uncomfortable and wanted to get out. It's not a traditional horror movie in the sense where there's lots of blood and gore and people are getting killed, but it is disturbing, I will say that. But you've probably already seen it. You've definitely heard of it either way. Then next up is another like winter horror movie called The Lodge, which I think is maybe the best film on this list. That might not be true at all, I don't know, but it's definitely up there. This is about like the stepmom of a family and the kids heading off to a lodge to spend some quality time together to really get to know each other. Like they've met and everything before, but they're trying to like each other more than they do because there's some conflict there because the mum has died, she's out of the picture and everything. And so yeah, there's, you understand the family conflict and stuff there. But what follows is just this night of horrors, and it's kind of like this very artistically done horror film, I suppose. It's not just there to be spooky and scary and fun. It's one to make you really think. This is one of the most artistic and thoughtful ones on this list, and I think it is honestly pretty incredible. Now, maybe it shouldn't count as one location though, because she does exit the house and she goes over like into some snowy fields and all that kind of stuff. But it's close enough. It's close enough. They're surrounding the lodge. It counts. Shut up. Anyway, next up, very similar to that, another one set in the snow and everything. There is The Thing. That's a classic. I don't need to talk much about it. You know what The Thing is. I'm done. I'm not going to say anything else, but The Thing is amazing. But one I do want to talk about that maybe you haven't heard of is one called Hard Candy, starring Patrick Wilson and Elliot Page, at the time Alan Page. And it is about this girl who is basically being groomed by this sexual predator, but who knows a lot more than she really leads on. And it's really, it's you kind of have to begin to ask who the real victim is in this situation. That's something that I really love about this film, where it's another one where you're like, oh my god, who do I feel bad for? No one, everyone, I don't fucking know. Like, it's a very challenging film to watch in that kind of way. No one's really the good guy or the bad guy, but you feel like you can definitely root for one of them a lot more than the other, the girl, obviously. And there's just something really interesting about this film with its like moral questions and everything. That's the kind of stuff I really like about a lot of horror movies like these. I love having characters with like complicated morals and everything. That's just always interesting to me. And this film also has one of the most just horrific scenes that you've ever seen, but that doesn't use gore at all, in a very surprising way. If you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't, it's interesting. That's all I will say. Then next up, and this is kind of the Stephen King run here where I've got a few in a row, 1408 is first. This is about a skeptical horror author who goes into the room of 1408 not believing in ghosts and stuff with the intentions of writing about it, but just making some shit up about it. But little does he know that he probably should have been a bit more worried about it than he originally was, as things start to get a bit spooky. Now, this film scared the fuck out of me when I was a kid, just by the way. Some very intense scenes, and it's also very creative in like how it starts to screw with the space and the environment. It's kind of a mind fuck, and yeah, I think 1408 is honestly really, 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 really good. Okay, I would recommend 1408 to just about anybody actually, because it's just a really solid one. You know, it's a really solid horror movie. Then next up is Misery, but you already know what Misery is, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. Dude gets caught by his biggest fan and whatever, and she tortures him and stuff, and it's good. It's good. It's awesome. Then there is The Mist, which is about a group of people all stuck in a supermarket where there is a mysterious mist revolving around it, and there are large monsters in there who will tear them to shreds. You never really visualize them, and that is something that is definitely a terrifying thought for somebody who might be scared of that kind of thing. I don't find this movie that scary, if I'm being honest, but what I do like about it is its daring ending. I won't tell you the details, but I think that the ending of The Mist is something that sets it apart. It's something that is so shocking and honestly one of my favorite movie endings of all time. It doesn't work for a lot of people though. That is a divisive opinion. A lot of people think it's dumb. A lot of people think it's funny. A lot of people think it makes the whole film feel like a waste of time. For me, I feel like it's ballsy. I feel like it's daring. I feel like it is one of the few films that would be willing to go in the direction that this film does. And I think it is absolutely worth the watch just for this ending alone. I think it's amazing. Then next up is a movie called The Autopsy of Jane Doe. The whole thing is set in a morgue as they are doing literally an autopsy on this dead girl's body, and some haunted things start to go around. But it is a little bit more clever than it sounds like, rather than just being about cheap thrills and spooks and that kind of stuff. There is a bit of a deeper story going on here that I do appreciate about this film, and I have also watched this multiple times just because I think it's a pretty damn good one. Then next up is 10 Cloverfield Lane, and much like Inside, I don't love where this movie goes in its final act, but for like 90% of the film, it's all set in this bunker as paranoia bubbles up, and some of the characters really begin to have their conflict together. I really love this film. I think it's amazing, except the ending, but hey, I won't spoil it here. It is worth a watch either way though, and the ending might work for you, I don't know. Then next up is Buried, and this is a movie that is all set 6 feet under, literally in a grave. This stars Ryan Reynolds, and it is just about him being stuck in this place. We never leave the grave. We never see any other setting at all. And the whole thing is just taking place as he is talking to people, trying to get himself saved, basically. It's all phone calls, and it's all discussion, conversation, and that kind of stuff. And I really like it. It's a dialogue-heavy film, and I think it's really intense and claustrophobic because we never get that sense of breath and freedom. We never really get to like, yeah, we're with him in there with it. Like, it's a bad situation to be in, and you feel it watching this film. And I think it's really creative because of that. Not a lot of films are willing to do that, because I think a lot of them will think, nah, that'll be boring. Audiences won't like that. Well, look, if I can be the spokesperson for the audience, we like it. This is an awesome movie. Then I thought I should just mention briefly Saw, okay? Saw is also set in one location for the most part. There's a few more locations, but for the most part, it's all set in that bathroom, and it counts, and I thought I should include it because people will be like, what? You didn't mention Saw? I mentioned it. And now I just want to mention a few non-horror movies. I'm not really going to describe them. I'm just going to list them out though. First up is Loft. The whole thing's set in a car. Much like Buried, it's all just about phone calls. Then there's Malcolm and Marie, all set in a house as a couple just argues, and I really, really love it. It's written by the dude that does Euphoria. Then next up is Snowpiercer, and that's the last one that I got written down. Snowpiercer is awesome. If you haven't seen it, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I don't want to talk too much about it because you probably already know what it is, but you should probably watch it because it's awesome. Anyway, that's about it. That's all I had to say. Those are all the one location horror movies I wanted to talk about today. Thanks for watching. Do all the things, please, all that stuff. I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye.